You know, there are moments in life when the pain feels so deep, so heavy, that you can't even see the light ahead. You pray, you cry, you wait, and yet nothing seems to change. It's in those moments that you start asking God, why me? Why now? But years later, when you look back, you realize that the very pain that tried to break you was the same pain God used to build you. I remember a woman who waited for years for her breakthrough. Every door she knocked on seemed to shut right in her face. She lost opportunities, friends, and even the confidence to dream again. She would say, maybe God has forgotten me. But what she didn't know was that God was quietly rewriting her story behind the scenes. One day, after years of tears and endurance, everything began to make sense. The job she didn't get, it would have kept her from discovering her real calling. The relationship that ended, it would have destroyed her peace. When she finally stepped into her purpose, she looked back and said, now I see it. God was there the whole time. Similarly, perhaps you've been through something that just didn't make sense. Maybe it was the loss of a loved one, the collapse of a dream, or a door that refused to open no matter how hard you knocked. But have you ever gone through something that only began to make sense years later? When the tears have dried and the wounds have healed, you look back and realize that the same storm you thought would destroy you actually positioned you for destiny. Furthermore, I want you to know this: God never wastes a season. Every disappointment, every delay, every detour carries a divine purpose. Even the tears you cried in private were counted by God. He saw every sleepless night, every prayer that felt unanswered. And though you couldn't see it then, He was shaping your character, strengthening your faith, and aligning your steps with His divine plan. What looks like pain today may one day become your greatest testimony. In fact, that's exactly what the Apostle Paul meant when he wrote in Romans chapter 8, verse 28, and we know that all things work together for good, to them that love God, to them who are called according to His purpose. Not some things, not a few things. He said all things. That means your heartbreak, your waiting season, your failure, your delay, all of it is working for good. Even when life doesn't make sense, God is still weaving purpose through every thread of your story. Moreover, I've come to understand that sometimes God hides His greatest miracles behind our deepest pain. He allows us to go through what we don't understand so that when the glory shows up, we'll know it wasn't by our strength, it was by His grace. That's why when you finally look back, you'll realize you didn't survive because you were strong. You survived because God was faithful. So today, as you reflect on where you are and where you've been, remember this: every chapter, even the painful ones, will one day make sense. Because when it's all said and done, your story will not be defined by what you lost, but by what God restored. You will look up and say, in my story, God always gets the glory. Life, in many ways, is like a story being written one chapter at a time. And sometimes you're living in a part of the story that doesn't make sense yet. You see, the challenge with being human is that we're often reading one page at a time while God already holds the entire book. There are days when you wonder why the plot of your life seems so complicated, why the people you trusted walked away, why your dreams seem delayed, or why the prayers you prayed still hang in the air unanswered. But just because you can't see the ending doesn't mean God hasn't already written it. He is the author, and your story is still unfolding according to His perfect design. Now think about Joseph, a young man with big dreams of leadership, favor, and greatness. But what followed those dreams wasn't applause or celebration. It was betrayal, slavery, and imprisonment. How could that possibly fit into the story of a chosen man? Yet years later, in Genesis chapter 50, verse 20, Joseph stood before the very brothers who betrayed him and said, "You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good." Isn't that powerful? The same pit that was designed to bury him became the path that led him to the palace. That's what happens when God is your author. He turns every plot twist into a prophecy fulfilled. Meanwhile, you might be in a chapter that feels unfair, one that makes you question if God still remembers your name. But can I tell you something comforting? Even when the pages of your life seem blank with silence, God is still writing. He doesn't need your permission to finish what he started. Philippians chapter 1 verse 6 says, "He who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion." That means he's not done yet. You might not like this part of the story, but one day you'll understand that it was necessary. Another thing to remember is that God's authorship doesn't always follow human logic. Sometimes he writes in paradoxes. He brings victory through surrender, strength through weakness, and wisdom through pain. Look at David, forgotten by his own family, yet chosen by God, overlooked by men, but handpicked by heaven. That's what divine authorship looks like. It rewrites every limitation and restores every broken identity. Also, when God writes your story, he doesn't erase the mistakes. He redeems them. The chapters you're ashamed of become testimonies of his mercy. The parts you thought would disqualify you become the very pages that reveal his grace. That's why you must stop comparing your story with someone else's. Your chapter 2 will never look like someone else's chapter 10, and that's okay, because God customizes every story for his glory. Then again, think about it. When you read a good novel, you don't stop in the middle just because the character is facing trouble. You keep reading, knowing that somehow the author will resolve the tension. The same is true for your life. You can't quit in the middle of your process. The author hasn't finished writing your victory yet. Every tear you've cried, every prayer you've whispered, every time you've held on when it hurt, all of it is being written into a masterpiece. So when you look at your life today, don't focus on how broken the story looks. Focus on the fact that the pen is still in God's hand. He's writing something beautiful, even if it doesn't look beautiful yet. And when the final chapter comes, you look back and realize that every line, every page, every struggle was leading you to a divine conclusion. Because in your story, there are seasons in life when it feels like God has gone silent. You pray, you fast, you worship, and yet heaven seems quiet. You look around and see others testifying of their miracles, but you're still waiting for yours. It's as though God has hidden himself, and you begin to wonder, did I do something wrong? Has God forgotten about me? But I want you to hear me clearly. God's silence is never his absence. His quietness often means he's preparing something greater than you could imagine. Sometimes the most powerful chapters in your story are written in the silence. When you can't hear God, it doesn't mean he's not speaking. It often means he's working behind the scenes, rearranging things, shifting people, and setting up divine connections that will align with his perfect will. Silence doesn't mean stillness. It means strategy. And that's something we often forget when we're in the waiting room of faith. Consider Jesus. For 30 years, he lived in quiet preparation before stepping into public ministry. Luke chapter 2, verse 52 tells us, "And Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man." 30 years of silence before 3 years of impact. The Son of God himself waited for the appointed time. If Jesus needed time to grow in wisdom and divine timing, how much more do we? Sometimes God's silence is his way of saying, I'm still working on you. He's shaping your character to match your calling, because he doesn't just want you to reach destiny. He wants you to be ready to stay there. Meanwhile, it's in those hidden chapters that your faith is truly tested. It's easy to trust God when everything is going well. But real faith begins when heaven is quiet, when you can't trace God's hand, Will you still trust his heart? The silence is where spiritual maturity is born. It's where you stop chasing signs and start cultivating trust. It's where you move from emotional faith to anchored faith. At other times, God uses silence to protect you. If he revealed everything too soon, you might run ahead of his plan. Sometimes he hides your next step because he knows if you saw the full picture, fear would make you retreat. Think of the Israelites. God led them out of Egypt, but didn't show them the Red Sea until they got there. Why? Because some miracles can only happen in the moment of desperation. If they had known the sea was ahead, they might never have left Egypt. Likewise, God hides certain details so your faith will grow stronger as you walk. Additionally, you must learn to rest in the silence, because when God is quiet, he's often teaching you to listen differently. You start to hear his voice through his word, through peace, through people, through circumstances. Sometimes the silence is not punishment, it's invitation. God is inviting you to draw closer, to know him beyond what he gives, and to love him simply for who he is. And maybe you're in that season right now where nothing seems to be moving and your prayers seem to echo back to you. If that's you, I want to remind you of this truth. Silence is not rejection. It's refinement. God is refining your motives, purifying your desires, and building endurance for the glory that's coming. Just because he's quiet doesn't mean the story has paused. The author is simply working on the next chapter, and it will be worth the wait. When Joseph was in prison, heaven seemed silent. When Esther was hidden in the palace, heaven seemed silent. When Jesus was in the tomb, heaven seemed silent. But in all three cases, God was preparing resurrection, revelation, and redemption. So don't misinterpret silence as abandonment. It's simply God's way of preparing the stage for his glory to be revealed. Because one day, when you look back, you'll realize that even in the quiet seasons, God was closer than ever. He was writing, watching, and working. You couldn't hear him, but he was right there. And when that chapter finally unfolds, you'll say with confidence, even in the silence, God was still good. Pain is something no one wants to experience, yet it is one of the most powerful tools God uses to shape our destiny. Many of us spend our lives running from discomfort, avoiding difficulty, and wishing for an easy path. But the truth is, purpose is often born out of pain. Without the furnace of trials, the gold of your potential would never be refined. The challenges you face today are not accidents. They are divine appointments for growth, character development, and destiny alignment. Consider Job. Here was a man who lost everything. His wealth, his family, even his health. To the outside world, it looked like tragedy. A life destroyed by misfortune. Yet Job's pain became the very instrument through which his faith was proven and his testimony magnified. James chapter 1 verse 2-4 reminds us, "Count it all joy when ye fall into diverse temptations, knowing this, that the trying of your faith worketh patience. But let patience have her perfect work, that ye may be perfect and entire, wanting nothing." Pain, when processed with faith, produces patience, character, and spiritual maturity. Moreover, sometimes the very situations we consider unfair or cruel are the stepping stones to our greatest purpose. There's a story of a young man who was fired from a job he loved. He felt humiliated, rejected, and devastated. But that very dismissal pushed him into starting his own business, which eventually grew far beyond what his old job could have offered. What seemed like a disaster was actually God redirecting him to his destiny. Every painful moment had a purpose. Every setback was a setup for a greater comeback. Furthermore, pain teaches empathy and equips you to lead and inspire others. If you've never struggled, you can't truly comfort, guide, or understand someone else who is struggling. Your wounds become windows through which God can pour his healing into others. Your story, once marked by pain, transforms into a testimony of hope and encouragement. Also remember that God sometimes allows pain to detach you from things that would hinder your destiny. The broken relationships, the failed plans, the lost opportunities, they are all part of God's refining process. He is clearing space for what is truly meant for you. What hurts now is preparing you for the glory that's coming. What you thought would destroy you is actually working for your good. And perhaps most importantly, pain drives dependence on God. When human strength fails, God's strength becomes evident. When we can't fix the situation, God reveals his power. Pain breaks pride, exposes faith, and creates a deeper intimacy with the Creator. It's through pain that we learn the ultimate lesson, that life is not about our strength, our plans, or our timing, it's about his. So, if you are in a season of hurt today, take heart. Don't despise the pain and don't despair in the struggle. Instead, ask God, Lord, what are you teaching me? How are you using this to shape my character and my destiny? Because the truth is, one day when you look back, you will see that every tear, every disappointment, and every wound had a divine purpose. And you'll say, God didn't waste a moment of my pain. He used it all to bring glory to his name. Life often doesn't follow the path we envision. We make plans, set goals, and chase dreams with all our energy, only to encounter unexpected detours, closed doors, missed opportunities, or delays that seem unbearable. And in those moments, it's easy to feel rejected, overlooked, or forgotten. But here's the truth. God's delays are not denials. Just because a door didn't open when you wanted, just mean he's saying no. Sometimes the timing isn't right, the stage isn't ready, or the lesson isn't learned. Take Moses, for example. He spent 40 years in the wilderness before God called him to lead the Israelites. 40 years. Can you imagine the doubts, the frustrations, and the temptations to give up? Yet God was preparing him, molding his character, and equipping him for a destiny far greater than he could have imagined. Exodus chapter 3, verse 10 to 12 reminds us that God's timing is perfect. So now go. I'm sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people out of Egypt. Moses wasn't ready before God's appointed time, but in his delay, God built wisdom, patience, and resilience. Similarly, consider your own life. Every delay, every setback, every moment of waiting is part of God's orchestration. Perhaps a relationship ended, a promotion didn't come, or a plan fell apart. What if that delay was actually a divine redirection? What if God was protecting you from something you couldn't see, or preparing you for something far greater than you could have imagined? Moreover, detours teach us trust and perseverance. They show us that life is not about rushing to the finish line, but growing through the journey. When we embrace detours, we develop patience, resilience, and clarity. We learn to rely not on our timing, but on God's wisdom. Because he sees the end from the beginning, he knows the path we must take, even if it looks uncertain to us. In addition, detours often position us in places we could never have reached on our own. Opportunities appear in unexpected ways, people cross our paths at divine moments, and experiences shape our character for future success. What seems like a delay is often a divine setup. What seems like a disappointment is often the preparation for destiny. And here's the final truth about detours. They don't diminish your story, they enrich it. The struggles, the waiting, and the unexpected twists become testimony. When you look back, you realize that the detours weren't setbacks, they were God's way of ensuring that every step of your story contributes to his glory. Every delay has a purpose, every closed door has a reason, and every pause is a divine pause for a greater plan. So if you find yourself frustrated by life's detours today, remember this: God is not late. He is working behind the scenes. Your story is unfolding exactly as it should. And when the time is right, you will step into your destiny fully prepared. And one day, when you look back, you'll say with certainty, God's delays were never denials. They were divine preparations for His glory. Trust is one of the most powerful forces you can cultivate in life. Yet it's also one of the hardest. Trust requires surrendering control, letting go of what you think should happen, and believing that God knows what is best. Many of us struggle with trust because we want to see the entire roadmap. But God rarely gives it all at once. He asks us to walk by faith, not by sight. Hebrews chapter 11 verse 8 tells us about Abraham, who left everything familiar without knowing where he was going, simply because God called him. Abraham's trust didn't eliminate fear, it replaced it with faith. Likewise, in your own life, there are moments when the path is unclear. You may not know how a situation will resolve, which door to take, or which decision is right. But that's exactly where trust becomes transformative. When you trust God, you begin to see beyond the immediate struggle. You start to understand that setbacks aren't punishments, but part of a divine plan. You realize that uncertainty isn't a threat. It's an opportunity for God to reveal His power. Furthermore, trust teaches patience and resilience. When we lean on our own understanding, we become anxious, frustrated, and impatient. But Proverbs chapter 3, verse 5 to 6 reminds us, trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not unto thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge Him, and He shall direct thy paths. When we trust God, He directs our steps. He turns confusion into clarity, fear into courage, and doubt into confidence. Also, trust reshapes our perspective. Instead of focusing on what we lack or what hasn't happened yet, we begin to focus on God's faithfulness. Every promise He has made becomes a beacon of hope. Every previous victory reminds us that He is trustworthy. Every moment of doubt becomes an opportunity to see His hand at work. Trust transforms our mindset from scarcity to abundance, from despair to hope, from anxiety to peace. Moreover, trust allows us to act boldly. When we know God is in control, we step into challenges with courage. We take risks for purpose rather than fear. We pursue dreams, serve others, and walk in obedience, not because we know how it will end, but because we know who holds the ending. Your faith doesn't remove obstacles, but it empowers you to rise above them. And perhaps the most beautiful part about trust is that it turns ordinary experiences into divine encounters. When you trust God with your story, even the mundane, difficult, and confusing moments become opportunities to witness His glory. You begin to recognize that life is not just about what happens to you. It's about how God uses every detail to shape you and reflect His goodness. So, if you find yourself doubting today, remember this. Trust doesn't mean the path will be easy. It means the author of your story is in control. Trust transforms fear into faith, obstacles into lessons, and delays into destiny. And one day when you look back on your life, you'll see that every step, every choice, and every challenge was orchestrated by God, leading you to a life where He alone gets the glory. One of the greatest struggles we face as humans is the desire for approval. We constantly seek validation from people, friends, family, colleagues, even strangers. We measure our worth by likes, comments, promotions, and recognition. Yet, in the pursuit of human applause, we often forget the one whose approval truly matters. Living for man's recognition will always leave you empty, but living for God's glory will fill your life with purpose, joy, and fulfillment. Consider Jesus. Even though He performed miracles, healed the sick, and spoke with authority, He never sought the praise of men. John chapter 8, verse 29 says, "And He that sent me is with me. The Father hath not left me alone, for I do always those things that please Him." Jesus' mission was not about popularity. It was about obedience and honoring God. His life reminds us that true satisfaction comes when we focus on pleasing God, not people. Similarly, your story is not meant to impress the world. It is meant to reflect God's glory. Every decision you make, every action you take, every goal you pursue should be guided by this principle. Am I living in a way that honors God? When you focus on His approval rather than human applause, your work, your relationships, and even your failures take on a deeper purpose. Furthermore, living for God's glory requires self-discipline. It means saying no to what distracts you, to what tempts you, and to what draws your focus away from His purpose. Productivity and personal growth are not just about achieving goals, they are about stewarding your time, talents, and resources in a way that magnifies God. Excellence becomes worship, effort becomes testimony, and perseverance becomes praise. Also understand that seeking human validation can mislead you. People's opinions are limited, inconsistent, and fleeting. They can't see the bigger picture like God does. But God sees the heart, the intention, and the eternal impact of your actions. That's why it's critical to align your life with His purpose rather than chasing fleeting recognition. When you live for God's glory, even your smallest efforts have eternal significance. Moreover, focusing on God's approval brings peace and confidence. You no longer feel the need to compete, compare, or perform for acceptance. You walk boldly in your calling, knowing that the one who matters most is with you. Your identity is secure, your purpose is clear, and your energy is devoted to what truly counts. So today I challenge you, stop performing for the crowd, stop chasing the applause, live for the crown. Live in a way that when people see you, they see God's work in motion. Every act of integrity, every moment of patience, every decision rooted in obedience glorifies Him. And one day, when you look back, you'll realize that your story was never about gaining human approval. It was about giving God the glory He deserves. Every day presents an opportunity to reflect God's glory in even the simplest of actions. It's not always about grand gestures or public recognition. It's about consistency, integrity, and excellence in the ordinary. How you treat people when no one is watching, the diligence you put into your work, the kindness you show in small moments. All of these are reflections of God's character in you. 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 18 reminds us, "But we all, with open face, beholding as in a glass the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into the same image from glory to glory, even as by the Spirit of the Lord." Your daily choices shape the reflection of God in your life. Moreover, productivity and purpose are intertwined with glory. When you pursue your goals with excellence and intention, you're not simply achieving for yourself, you're honoring God. Whether it's your career, your studies, your ministry, or your family, the effort you put forth becomes an act of worship. Doing your best in every area of life is one of the most powerful ways to give God glory without saying a word. Additionally, reflecting God's glory means walking in love, humility, and integrity. When others see your patience, forgiveness, and faith, they catch a glimpse of God through you. Your actions become testimony. Your lifestyle becomes a sermon, and your consistency becomes a mirror that points people to Him. Every choice matters, every interaction counts, and every act of excellence glorifies the Creator. Consider small examples, showing respect to someone who disagrees with you, giving your full attention at work even when it's tedious, or offering help without expecting recognition. These are not small at all. They are seeds of God's glory planted in everyday life. When multiplied over time, they reflect a life aligned with purpose and spiritual maturity. Furthermore, reflecting His glory is about perspective. You can face challenges, disappointments, and setbacks, but when your focus is on God's purpose, Rather than temporary outcomes, your life becomes a living testimony. You begin to see that even struggles, when handled with faith, can magnify his power and love. Excellence in adversity speaks louder than words ever could. And perhaps most importantly, the transformation is ongoing. As you allow God to work in your life, you become more like him, reflecting his image from glory to glory. You don't need to seek attention or approval. Your life itself becomes a beacon of his goodness. The habits, disciplines, and character traits you cultivate daily are the ways your story testifies. God's glory is being revealed through you. So I want to encourage you. Focus on living a life that reflects God's glory in every moment. Let your work, your relationships, your decisions, and even your struggles become a canvas that shows his hand at work. One day, when you look back on your story, you'll see a life that was not lived for recognition, fame, or applause, but a life that consistently gave God the glory he deserves. Looking back is one of the most powerful practices in life. Often we are so focused on what lies ahead or consumed by current struggles that we fail to see the footprints God has already left along our journey. Reflection allows us to recognize his hand, even in the moments we thought were chaotic, painful, or meaningless. When we pause to look back, clarity emerges, and we begin to understand that nothing in our lives has been wasted. Think about David in the Psalms. In Psalm chapter 23, he says, "He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake." David had faced betrayal, loss, and countless battles, yet he recognized God's guidance and provision through every season. Likewise, when you take the time to reflect, you realize that the victories, the delays, the lessons, and even the heartbreaks were all orchestrated by God to lead you exactly where you needed to be. Moreover, reflection deepens gratitude. When you remember how far God has brought you, your perspective changes. The disappointments that once felt crushing now reveal purpose. The obstacles that seemed insurmountable now testify to his faithfulness. Every person who doubted you, every closed door, every season of waiting, when viewed through the lens of hindsight, they become testimonies of God's perfect timing and unending provision. Furthermore, looking back helps you recognize patterns of divine intervention. You begin to see how doors you thought were closed were actually leading you to better opportunities. You notice how relationships ended not to hurt you, but to protect you or redirect you toward your destiny. You understand how moments of weakness became channels for God's strength. Reflection allows you to trace the thread of God's glory woven throughout your story. Also, this practice strengthens faith. When you can point to God's faithfulness in the past, you can trust him more confidently in the present. You realize that the same God who delivered you then is the same God who will guide you now. It empowers you to step into uncertainty without fear because your past testimony proves that he never abandons his children. Brother Brian told me he never abandons his children, and most importantly, looking back enables you to declare God's glory with confidence. It's one thing to believe that God is good in theory, it's another to see it lived out in your own story. Every trial that shaped you, every challenge that refined you, every blessing that surprised you, all of it becomes evidence that God was always at work. When you reflect on your life, you will say with unwavering certainty, even when I didn't understand, God was orchestrating my story. In my story, he always gets the glory. As we come to the close of this message, I want you to take a deep breath and really let this sink in. Your story is not random. Every chapter, every struggle, every delay, every triumph, it all points to one undeniable truth. God always gets the glory. No matter what happened yesterday, no matter what challenges you face today, the author of your story is faithful. He is the one who wrote the beginning, and he is still writing the ending. I want you to reflect for a moment on the entirety of your journey. Think of the times you felt lost, the moments you were broken, the seasons you couldn't see the purpose. Now imagine the hand of God guiding you through it all, turning every trial into a testimony, every setback into a setup, every tear into triumph. The beauty of God's plan is that it is bigger than your understanding, yet every detail has meaning. So today, I challenge you to make a declaration. Stop giving your story to fear, doubt, or the opinions of people. Instead, surrender it fully to God. Let every success, every failure, every heartbreak, and every blessing be used as a platform to glorify Him. As Revelation chapter 1, verse 2 to 5 reminds us, God is faithful. He is the Alpha and Omega, and He calls us to reflect His glory. Your life is a testament, and your story is His canvas. Lift your eyes and say it with me in your heart. Lord, I surrender my story. I release my past, my pain, my fears, my dreams into your hands. Let every chapter of my life bring you glory. In my story, you always get the glory. Remember, giving God the glory doesn't mean life will be without challenges, but it means that through every moment, your life becomes a living testimony of His faithfulness. It means that one day, when you look back, you won't see wasted seasons, but divine appointments. You won't see failures, but lessons. You won't see delays, but divine preparation. And in every moment, you will see God's hand at work. So go forward with faith, walk boldly with purpose, and live every day as a chapter that honors God. One day when your story is fully revealed, you will look back and declare with confidence, in my story, God always gets the glory. This is your moment. This is your story. And this is God's glory being revealed through you.